Hello and welcome to the inaugural episode of Third Thursday 30, a monthly program that is designed to provide you with the information, insight necessary to help you make sure that your money supports your life in the way you want it to, all in 30 minutes or less. So let's get started, shall we? Today's topic of conversation is the retirement tax trap. And the retirement tax trap is something that I've noticed over the years. You see, since I started practicing law, and about 30 years ago now when I started it, I've helped more than 30, 40, 50, many thousands of people. That's an overstatement, of course, hundreds of people. But I've seen a trend that's developed over the years, and that trend is that there has been a lack of focus on the effect of tax-deferred savings. This lack of focus on tax-deferred savings has caused people to jeopardize both their current and their future family life. And so one of the things I want to talk to you about today is that retirement tax trap and how it can be avoided. So if you bear with me as I stumble through this a little bit, I spent the last half hour fighting with my microphone and found out that the nice expensive one that I bought is not working. And so I've got one that kind of sounds like I'm talking through a tin can. As we continue to evolve these presentations, this is going to get better. But that's life, right? We push forward and move on. So let's talk a little bit about the retirement tax trap and what it means for you and your family. So the retirement tax trap is the result of the savings methods that we have been following since the 1980s. The 1980s is when the 401k was developed, and the 401k has put everybody's focus on tax-deferred investing. Our conversation today is going to focus on the pros and cons of that tax-deferred investing, but primarily on the cons, because you're going to find out through the course of our conversation today that the impact of tax-deferred investing can cause you to take greater risk during your life for your financial accumulation, as well as in your future as you're looking to try to produce income from that money. And so without further ado, let's start with the case against tax-deferred investing. So no good presentation is official without a PowerPoint presentation, so we're going to show us a little bit of pictures here. Besides that, then you'd get tired of looking at my mug for 30 minutes, right? So let's talk about the problems of tax-deferred investing. You see, there are certain undeniable truths that we must be attending to as we look toward the next 20, 30, or even 40 years for some of you in your retirement. And that is that there are social, economic, and political factors that come to play that are causing us to have a very high risk that fundamental planning assumption that you have made that your tax rates will be lower in retirement is incorrect. So, as any good lawyer, I'm going to put on the case today, the people versus the financial industrial complex. And you're the jury. At the end of this, you guys get to make the decision for yourself what you believe it is. So understand that when we do have a trial, we have potentially three different types of standards of proof that are necessary to establish a case. Well, those standards of proof are, one, by clear and convincing evidence, which you tend to see in the dramatized courtrooms of criminal trials. There's also a more lenient standard, which is called a preponderance of evidence, which is more likely than not. And so when we are talking about whether or not we have to have clear and convincing evidence like a jury trial or a preponderance of evidence, or simply more probable or not, I submit that with your retirement savings and your financial future, that the more probable than not standard is really what we need to be looking at. And so when we look at the current financial condition of the world, and we look at the United States and what is going to be happening in the next, again, 20, 30, 40 years of your retirement life, we'll see that there are certain undeniable pressures that are going to come to bear. That means that the probability is that the personal income tax rates will be increased in the future and not decreased in the future. And this is why. First of all, we cannot deny that the population is aging. And that effect of that aging population is reflected in this chart, which shows that in 1950, there were approximately 16 workers for every one person that was receiving Social Security. In 1960, that was 5 to 1. In 2015, that was down to 3 to 1. And we project ahead to 2035, that ratio is going to be more like 2 to 1. So we're not here to discuss today what is going to happen to Social Security when this happens, but we are here to talk about the overall trends that are affecting your finances and what is likely to happen in the future. And we cannot deny that with the loss of workers, there's going to be greater importance with regard to sources for income for the government, not just to support Social Security, but the overall revenues of the government. And we also have to be sensitive to the fact that the United States is kind of a far outlier in terms of the rest of the organized economic world. I'm going to show you a few slides here from the OECD, which is basically the largest developed nations that are not China, for obvious reasons. These countries have shared their economic data. And what this picture is showing you here is that in 2015, when this one was last prepared by them, that the United States, which is the bar in red, had a position amongst the lowest countries in terms of the U.S. tax revenue as a percentage of the gross domestic product. Now, that is somewhat understandable in the context of us being the big gorilla on the block in terms of gross domestic product, but the fact of the matter is we are along the lower baseline in terms of how much of our tax revenue is generated in proportion to our GDP. And this is not a one-off situation. If we look historically, we have always been along the lower edge of the countries in terms of tax revenue as a percentage of the gross domestic product. So you see that it's happened over a few years where we've actually fallen lower, but basically we have set a standard over the years where, because of our status as the economic gorilla, we have been in a position where we are able to take less percentage of our GDP as tax revenue. Now, think to yourself as we look forward again to the next 20, 30, 40 years, what happens as we continue to experience continued globalization and competition, which is affecting our GDP that is not growing like it used to grow. Now, we're not going to talk too much about the government debt, but we all know it's out there. We have a situation that, according to some people, may be unsustainable. If you want to follow the new theory that we can always have debt, then that's fine. However, we have to pay attention to the fact that our debt as a percentage of GDP is, again, amongst the highest in the developed nations. And as we look towards the deficit, again, the deficit is one of the highest amongst all of the organized countries. So ask yourself, what is the probability that in the future we are going to continue to have ourselves the type of revenue that we've had in the past in terms of the government without raising taxes? Now, to talk a little bit about the political, but not to get too political, we hear a lot of talk these days about the income inequality. And we hear a lot of talk about how we need to increase our spending on social programs. Now, what this slide is showing you is that the United States is historically amongst the lowest, again, of the organized economic countries, that in terms of the amount of revenue that the government takes that they spend on social programs, obviously because we have such a large proportion in our military. However, what you need to understand with regard to the OECD and other things that are happening out there is this group, of which the United States is part and parcel of, is designed to influence each other. And this influence is what's leading our politicians to see, okay, well, maybe we need to spend more on social programs because so many other countries spend more. All of this is not to talk to you today about the good or bad of these things, but rather just to enlighten you into the possibility, if not probability, that the social, economic, and political factors are going to cause the income tax rates to increase. Now, let's talk a little bit about the context of this. Currently, I'm showing you what is the tax rates following the Trump tax cuts, also known as the TCJA, or the Tax Cut and Job Act. And understand what that has done for the standard U.S. taxpayer. Well, first of all, overall, that has reduced the number of brackets, the amount of payment by about 2 percentage points across each and every one of the tax brackets. Now, I also want you to focus on those numbers of those tax brackets. See, there are only 6 tax brackets there under the current structure of the tax code. And that has varied over the years to as little as 2 before there was the pledge of no new taxes, read my lips. And now we've seen over the years that that has gone back up to 6. But before then, we had as many as 10, 15 different tax brackets that could be there. Now, what is the impact of that? Well, the impact of that is that it has made what was potentially a fundamentally sound philosophy, that you would have a lower tax rate in retirement than you do during your earnings years, a fallacy. A fallacy that will come back to bite you in the rear end. And we're trying to prevent that from happening. So, let's see an example of what it used to look like and what it could look like. So this is the tax brackets back immediately following the changes that Reagan put into place, where we did lower some of the tax brackets. And I want you to focus just a second on the numbers there. For example, if you had a income back in the day of $16,000, then you'd have a tax rate of 28%. Now, inflation changes things, right? Inflation changes the value of a dollar, and that's what we're showing here now. Because that's $16,000 that was at a 28% tax rate. If you converted that to 2018's dollars, well, that's an income of $115,000. Think about that for a second. Back in 1982, we had an income of about $16,000, which is now about $115,000. That, my friends, is inflation. That is how we have our buying power incredibly reduced over time. And we have to be conscious of that as we look forward. Because when we look forward into retirement, we have a couple of factors that really can come to play to hurt us. And those factors are inflation and market risk, and, as we're going to talk about further, tax rate risk. You still with me? I'm fumbling through some of this stuff, trying to make my technology work here. But even if I haven't made the case to you that tax rates will go up simply from economic, demographic factors, understand that investing in this tax-deferred environment has a double-edged effect. Okay, you hear a lot as you're accumulating about how you should invest in that tax-deferred environment to get the benefits of that. Now, what I'm about to show you is how that double-edged sword will get you. Okay, so let's talk about what happens if tax rates remain the same. Because one of the things that happened as a result of the Tax Cut and Job Act has been a fundamental change in the tax structure. Actually, it wasn't the Tax Cut and Job Act, but it's part of that ongoing conservative movement over the years to flatten the tax brackets, to have more income under the same tax rates. And so what's happened by that is we've either going to have a situation where we go back to the old times where we have great graduation of different tax rates, or we're going to stick where we have these very relatively flat type of tax brackets, and that means your income will be stable in terms of whether or not you're in the same bracket or not. Now, what that is going to do is it's going to give us some ability to predict what our income is going to be in the future. Because, folks, doesn't what really matter is what's in your pocket after taxes? Okay, and so let's say that we are in a situation where we are in our late 50s, okay, and we're or maybe mid 50s. We're on that cusp of retirement. We're trying to figure out how to best save our money for retirement. Well, one of the things that people tend to look at that point in time is we're able to do some additional deferral, they call catch-up provisions, that give us the ability to put more money tax deferred. I submit to you that that may be the wrong way to go about doing things because of the impact on taxes in the future. Regardless of whether or not tax rates go up, the impact of taxes on your income obviously reduces what goes in your pocket. And so we're going to talk a little bit about how that looks. So I'm going to share an example with you here. So let's take a second here and think about the situation where we have all of our money in retirement and we have set everything aside in our tax deferred bucket. Now, one of the things that I've seen over the years is people have failed to appreciate the effect of income taxes on their retirement and how that reduces what's going to come into their household. So this is an example I want to show you where we have a portfolio where we have an assumed tax rate of 24% and we have a pre-tax earnings rate of 8%, and we're going to be good stewards of our money going forward. What people don't realize is that there is such a tremendous impact of that taxes. And let's take a look at that. So what this calculation shows you, if you can see it, is if that person just kept that $517,000 account through retirement and took the required minimum distributions as a dutiful taxpayer, and perhaps they did not need the money, they just were a good steward of that money when it came out. Because understand that taxes affect people whether we are on the lower end of the equation or we are in the middle income range or we're on the high end of the income range. It affects people in the terms of the reduction of their quality of life. So if we kept that money and we did not have to use it and we were good stewards of it and we reinvested it, what this is showing you is that with that $517,000 portfolio, if we lived to the ripe old age of 90, well, if we kept it in that type of an account, we would end up paying taxes over time of close to $775,000 on that $500,000 in our retirement account. Now let that sink in. You have $500,000 in your retirement account, and Uncle Sam is going to get $750,000 in taxes from that. See, that's the retirement tax trap in a nutshell. You have become a nice little tax-paying robot that you've built these funds for them to take. And how do we get $775,000 coming out taxes? Well, first we have taxes at that income tax rate on the RMDs of about $284,000. Then if we reinvested that, there'll be taxes on that. And then, as many people do not realize and appreciate, when you pass away, whatever is left in that retirement account at that time is taxed. And it can be taxed immediately if we mess up and do it the wrong way, or over the life of whoever receives it, which is only going to increase the amount of taxes paid over their lifetime. Now, let's say instead of keeping it in that qualified account, you decide that you're going to convert it to a Roth. In that case, you would be able to do it in a strategic fashion where you would pay approximately $125,000 in taxes during that conversion, and you would never have to pay tax on that fund again, absent the government passing a law that would be unconstitutional. Okay? So, pay me now, pay me later. What people do not appreciate is the fact that their biggest debt as they approach retirement is the IRS. So, not only does it have an impact where we are going to pay taxes in an exorbitant amount over our lifetime if we stay there, as I said, it has the ability, the retirement tax trap, to jeopardize our savings and force us to take additional risk. So again, let's talk about somebody who's in their later earning years and are trying to make sure that they can retire safe and secure. What this diagram is showing you is, let's take that hypothetical person again who's in his mid-50s, has 10 more years till he wants to retire, and has accumulated $500,000 in retirement savings. So if we want to have a after-tax income of approximately $40,000 a year out of that fund when we are in retirement, then in order to be able to generate enough capital to be able to produce that type of income for a lifetime until approximately 90 at a rate that is what's considered a safe withdrawal rate, meaning you're not expected to outlive your money if you have it at that, which is 2.8% by recent studies. So in order to be able to generate enough capital to generate that $40,000 a year after tax, with $15,000 a year being able to be contributed on top of that $500,000, well, that account would have to chase approximately 11% return on investment. Now, folks, you look to the next 20, 30 years and ask yourself if you think that's a realistic number to chase, let alone whether or not you would be willing to bite off on the risk that it would take to be able to generate that type of return. Now, we need to change our perspective, because there is another way. That is not deferring taxes, but actually paying taxes now and moving on into a non-taxable future. So let's take a look at what happens if instead you take that $500,000, you convert it, and you pay taxes on it. So at that point in time, you have about $420,000. You're still making a $15,000 a year annual contribution for the next 10 years. Well, to generate the next nest egg you need for that income in a after-tax environment, you only need $776,000 to generate, which means to be able to have the same amount of money in your pocket in retirement that you wish to have, you only have to get a rate of return of 3.53%. Now, which would you rather do? Spend the next 10, 20, 30 years of your life trying to chase 11% return on your investments so you don't outlive your money, or 3% so you don't outlive your money? So, folks, I promise that we're going to have these conversations, and they're going to be within 30 minutes or less. So I'm going to wrap up a little bit here, but I want you to understand that the income tax rates are probably going to go up. And if the income tax rates would go up, then in that prior example, you'd need even more capital, which means you'd have to have even greater rate of return or save even more during your last earnings years. This is why I contend that the retirement tax trap jeopardizes both your current lifestyle and your future lifestyle, because the retirement industrial complex has forced us to look only at tax deferral to the omission of tried and true savings vehicles that would have been a foundation of your retirement savings prior to the 1980s. You see, we're focusing only on tax deferred in our savings, and we need to be thinking more broadly. We need to change our perspective. We need to look at tax deferred vehicles where they are appropriate. We have to look at some taxable vehicles. And most importantly, we have to look at those tax exempt or free vehicles that are at our disposal to be able to assist us in our retirement savings journey. Folks, regardless of where you are in life, whether you're early on in your savings career, or you are in retirement, or you're in that last push to retirement, you do need to be cognizant and use the various tools for tax control that are within our grasp. We need to diversify amongst account types. You need to use those tax-deferred products where they are appropriate. And you need to properly blend those asset bases so that you can withdraw from different accounts in your retirement. You should carefully consider what assets are held in which type of account, and you should be sure to consider all the tools that are available to meet your needs. So, I'd like to take this moment. Thank you for joining me for my inaugural presentation of the third Thursday 30. I promise this is going to get more refined as we go on. As a matter of fact, I had this nice expensive microphone that I bought for this presentation that worked up until 45 minutes before our presentation today. So, best made plans of mice and men. So, as we move forward, if you do wish to come in and chat with me or contact us by phone, we'll have a conversation regarding some of your options. I've given you information. I told you the third Thursday 30, our job here is to give you insight and information to make sure that your money supports your life the way that you want it to. Now, it's up to you to take action. If you'd like to take action, You can contact us to do that, or I'd invite you to go ahead and chat with any of your advisors if you have, to make sure that you are being properly protected against the retirement tax trap. So, feedback other than, boy, that microphone quality was not good. I appreciate that in the comment box below. And anything you'd like to talk about in the future, please let us know as well. We've wonderful getting suggestions from the crowd. So, without further ado, folks, thank you for joining us for the first Thursday 30. And I look forward to talking to you again next month with more information designed to help you and your family avoid the common pitfalls and problems that are out there in terms of retirement and savings. So, have a good afternoon. Look forward to seeing you next month.